ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ticklish Business, the podcast all about celebrating the world of classic film. I'm Kristen Lopez, and Emily Edwards is here. Yay!
Hello.
I know. And Emily and I, for once, are on the same time zone. Dare I say the same state? Actually, in the same general town space of Los Angeles. So, progress. And we are joined by a very special guest, friend of Ticklish Biz, the Czar of Noir, Mr. Eddie Muller. Eddie, how are you?
I'm doing as well as can be expected.
Exactly. But thankfully, classic film.
And it's too bad that you say that right now and everybody knows what you mean.
I will say, though, classic film has been the balm for my soul. It always is. But like, I think this year, the last 2 months, even more, so I think this year's TCM Classic Film Festival, it's always an exciting and emotional time, but I feel like this is going to remember when we all came back together after COVID and it had like this feeling? I feel like that feeling's going to be there, but very different. Like we need this collectively. We need the festival.
It's interesting you say that because I have already done 2 festivals of my own this year. Right, of the Noir City festivals, and you are right. I mean, that feeling was palpable in the auditorium that people just needed some kind of escape in a safe space, is what I called it, or sanctuary, where they could just get away. And although sometimes the films don't allow you to get away, because it's interesting how movies made 75 years ago, it really hits home when suddenly there'll be a scene that is about exactly what's happening right now. And people are like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. This was 75 years ago. They were warning us about this, and here it is happening. So
exactly.
Sometimes I actually have done festivals where I've structured it that way, but I have to be honest, I never really imagined that we would get where we are now quite this fast. I mean, I was kind of hoping it would never happen, but
we'd learned something from the movies and media that we love.
Yep.
Exactly. And of course, I mean, we're here to celebrate your new book. Well, actually, it's a revised and expanded version of a book you've already written, Dark City Dames, The Women Who Defined Film Noir, which I went looking for the original copies, and they are really because the original went out of print, but they're
pricey. Is that what you're going to say?
They're pricey. You could make a mint, I think, if you have original.
No, not me. I don't make that money. That's a bookseller selling that for $500 or whatever,
Exactly.
Especially if you find one that's actually signed by the women, that'll really set you back.
Are there a lot of those?
When that book originally came out, its debut, and this is kind of interesting because its re-debut will be at the TCM Classic Film Festival,
right,
in April. But its original debut was at my festival, the Noir City Film Festival, at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood back in whatever year that was, 2001 or 2002. I can't even remember now. And the women were there. I mean, they weren't all still alive. Marie had passed away. She was the first to go, I'm sorry to say. But they were there. And so the people who were at that event, it was quite the signing, because there were, I'm going to say, like 300 or 400 copies that were signed by the 5 women who were still alive.
That's incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool.
Well, I mean, I'm always interested, as somebody who is writing a book right now that I would hope would be revised and expanded upon in later days. What did you, I guess for you, how did you want to build on the first book? What did you want to add? What I guess distinguishes this from when you wrote it back initially?
Well, I'll tell you, I did not really want to expand it that much. I just wanted it to be back out there because I felt like things had changed so in so many interesting ways. The world has changed in the 20 some odd years since that book first came out. And in some respects, I felt that the stories that the women had to tell were even more essential for people to hear today than back when the book originally came out. Of course, the publisher, they wanted new material, and my problem with that initially was, well, the whole thing that made the book special in the first place is that I had access to them. That these women, this wasn't like one or two interviews. This was months that I spent with these people and really getting to know them intimately. And I wouldn't have that opportunity with any of the new profiles in the book. So my editor, Cindy Sapala, and I devised an approach that allowed the 10 new profiles that I do to sort of be counterpoints to the 6 major profiles in the book, because the one thing that all the women shared that I profile in depth is that they were, I don't really love using this word, but they were survivors. They had lived to a ripe old age and they had seen everything and had this perspective that they were willing to share that really made that special to me. Of course, when I picked the additional profiles, I realized, well, now I get to tell some stories about women who didn't survive. And I feel that the counterpoint between those is very poignant. When you see a tale like Gail Russell's or Peggy Castle's, it really hits home and makes you appreciate the lives that the survivors led all the more.
What's interesting is looking at that, we know that film noir as a genre came out, some argue, as a response to World War II, others say it was more, distanced than that. But for me, looking at all of the women that you profile, that distinction between survivor and the ones who didn't live, long, happy lives, I guess, is it for you, how do you, I guess, get away from not making it art imitating life type of stories? I often feel like with old Hollywood stars, they often get labeled with like they lived the art that they made on screen. The characters that they were the people that they were off screen.
Yeah. Well, that kind of cuts to the crux of this whole project, right? To me, and I want you to know, Kristen and Emily, this is the first interview I have done in support of this new edition.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
So you guys have that distinction. I hope it's an honor, but I'll just say
it definitely is.
So I'm going to try out some good stories on you here.
I'm okay with this. Let's do it.
The essential thing for me was when this project was first germinating, it all had to do with the start of my film festival in Los Angeles. The first film noir festival I did, it was not called Noir City back then. It was just the Festival of Film Noir. And because these women were still around, and there was a very interesting character named Marvin Page who worked with the American Cinematheque. I don't know if you ever knew Marvin Page.
No.
He was a casting director, and he was like the gatekeeper to old Hollywood. So if you were showing a classic film, Marvin was the guy to call, and he'd say, I can get you so-and-so to come out and make an appearance, blah, blah, blah. And so it was through Marvin that I met all these women. And I'll be quite honest, Marvin and I had a very tempestuous relationship.
I can only imagine.
That's the Hollywood way,
that.
though. I don't know if there's any relationship in Hollywood that's not tempestuous or associated with it.
Yeah, someday I may write an essay about my relationship with Marvin. And
I'm imagining a noir character himself.
He pretty much was, yes. Anyway, it was so interesting to me to have that experience and to meet these women who clearly their images on screen they informed who I am as a person, right? As a film lover, but also just in terms of my attitude about women, my attitude about the way men behave with women, all of this kind of stuff was roiling around. And then to meet them, at an advanced age, let's put it that way, and to actually have the experience of sitting with them in a movie theater, watching them watch themselves, a younger version of themselves, that's kind of what got the whole thing going, right? Because I would sit with Evelyn, or I would sit with Colleen or Anne, and I would just say, how did she get from being that person on the screen to being the person that's sitting with me right now? And in some cases, they never expected what I call the last hurrah, which is sort of what I gave them with this book. Because in addition to writing the book, we would travel around. I traveled with Ann Savage all over the place, showing Detour to audiences who had no idea what it was. And it was such a treat for them to actually get Vera, the meanest woman in the history of movies, to actually get her, in front of an audience was astounding for the audience, but also for Anne, who thought that entire part of her life was over and done and would never be resurrected. So I forget where we started with that, Kristen, but that was really what informed my approach to this. And I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, you were asking about, they live a life that's like the movies, blah, blah, blah. I just saw people. I just saw actual people. And to me, the starting point wasn't, oh, they were such a big star, I'm so lucky they're still around and I get to write about them. It was just like I was writing about people who had this very, very unusual way of making a living and how that affected them in the totality of their lives. I am not a person who is easily starstruck. I mean, if I met you name the biggest star in the world today, and I will tell you, if I met him, I would I wouldn't be fazed. Right. I mean, yeah. There are some people, I'm sure, musicians mostly, that I would kind of be in awe of, but it's not actors. I'm not in awe of actors.
It's the weirdest job in the world. And the people who get to do it are lucky, but it's also just a really weird job.
It is. It is a really weird job. But I also think that, I'm not stupid. If I had interviewed them 40 years earlier, they would have been very different people. Right. Yeah. And it's that process of aging and realizing, that was just a thing. That's not my whole life. That was just an interesting aspect of my life. And that's really why this book is so, it's so close to my heart, because I was so happy that the original publisher of the book, a woman named Judith Regan, and I don't know if you know anything about Judith Regan, but
I know of Judith Regan. So yeah, yes.
They called her the Dragon Lady of contemporary publishing, because she was supposedly, I don't know what kind of language I can use on your show, but she was considered to be like the biggest bitch in publishing, right? And I just thought Judith, I don't think anybody would have cared one whit if Judith was a man, because, she just behaved like a man in a man's world. She didn't take shit from anybody. And, she dished it out as well as she got it. And it's honestly because of Judith that the book is what it is, because when I presented this idea that we're talking about right now, like, these are just people. I mean, I don't want to do a coffee table book about how fabulous they were and look at how gorgeous and glamorous these women were. I wanted to do a book about how weird it is to make your living. And then what happens when Hollywood just kicks you to the curb and says, you're done. We don't need to look at you anymore.
This is the substance for real. I mean, essentially, we're still talking about, I think, that question of the not the flavor of the week, but yeah, essentially like with women, the overturn, the churn of how
Yeah,
often, and I think it's funny you have somebody like Marcia Hunt in the book, who most people I think would look at her first, she did so many different types of roles. You don't often know when Marcia Hunt is in a movie, but when you see her, you're like, oh hey, she's here. But then you have somebody like Evelyn Keyes, who I think unfortunately just gets labeled as like one of the Mrs. John Hustons,
Hmm.
and I think that what's great about the book is kind of showing how the noir landscape kind of allowed them to show different elements of themselves. Or I mean, Ella Raines, I think, is more known now through the TCM community for her
Absolutely.
noirs than I don't know than she might have been when she was actually working at the time.
I have no doubt that that is absolutely true. And it's funny that you mentioned Marcia and Evelyn because those are the two smartest human beings I have ever known. And I'm not qualifying this by gender. Those are the two smartest people I've known in my life. And it was such an incredible, it was an honor to know them both, very different women, but man, they were sharp. Um, anyway, I'm realizing I'm going to have to get better about this because I started to drift into my own little reverie here of thinking about these
That's
people.
that's
And,
the pot. That's ticklish business. That's the ticklish business way. We're all in our reveries of our own thoughts. I have to ask about one of my favorite people that you talk about in this. I love Audrey Totter. Very unsung film noir. Evildoer. She's got a great face. She's the queen of reactions. I don't think there's a
yes,
day that ends
yes.
in Y where I don't see the gif of her from um
Lady in the Lake,
Lady in the Lake, yeah, that's on my timeline.
where the camera's moving in on her and she gives the big eyes, Yeah.
Exactly. And yet, I mean, it always pains me when I discover an actress that you're just like, why didn't she do more? Why is she not well known alongside your Betty Davises and your Joan Crawford? She had such a unique look and a style about her.
Yeah, it's and as the book points out, it's all timing, it's all luck, and I think the lesson in the book is like, how do you deal with I'm not going to say misfortune because there isn't a single one of these women that I knew who felt like disgruntled, like it didn't happen, to the degree it should have happened for me. I mean, these women definitely felt like they were blessed to have these careers, even when they're telling me stories of how the studios, like you call it, the churn, how they realized it was happening to them. I mean, Ann Savage knew exactly that it was happening. When Janice Carter signed on at Columbia, Ann knew it's me and her. It's a grudge match now. Only one of us is going to survive this at the studio. So she knew how the game worked. But the story that I wanted to bring out was like, so how do you survive that? How do you go on with your life? Right. And it was easier for some than others. I mean, Evelyn just lived her entire life like it was a movie anyway. I mean, and she was the star of her own movie. So she would just say to me, oh, it was time to recast. That was, when John Huston essentially was finished with Evelyn, she just recast her life story, and then it was like, oh, I'm going to go to South America and I'm just going to party and do all this.
So
And then,
cool.
and then she meets Artie Shaw, and then, or she meets Mike Todd first. And then Mike Todd dumps her for Elizabeth Taylor. And then, she just picks up and meets Artie Shaw at some jazz club in Paris. And it's like 11 years with Artie Shaw. And then he dumps her for some younger woman, and she becomes a novelist. Right. I mean, this is how you survive a tumultuous life. You think highly of yourself. That's part of it, and like nobody could tell Evelyn that she wasn't the star of her own movie.
I love that.
As she lived,
I love that idea of just like, no, have the confidence that you're going to survive this, have the confidence that you're better than the way people are treating you, and have confidence in your own ability to deal with what life throws at you.
Precisely. Emily, you hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly what it takes. And sometimes, some of the women like Colleen was just so insecure always that even when she was being cast opposite Tyrone Power and Bing Crosby and Victor Mature, I mean, foremost in her mind was, I don't actually belong here. Why is this happening to me? She couldn't see that she had the light. I'm a total believer in that theory about movie stars. It's like there are certain people that have this weird light in them that people react to, right? It has nothing to do with performance. It has nothing to do with skill. There's something that the camera reads in that person. And it just, for lack of a better term, it's the light. She had the light. It shows up when the camera looks at her, and it doesn't matter what's in her head. The light is there, right? But how you react to how you deal with it is your story. And I find that endlessly fascinating.
When I think too with noir actresses, especially, Marie Windsor, I think most people, even big TCM fans, would be hard pressed to think of another Marie Windsor performance outside of The Narrow Margin. Or I've shown people
The Killing. The other one. Yeah.
But I know I've shown people Out of the Past, and I've shown other Jane Greer movies, and they're just like, what? Why is it different? It's a different vibe. They so associate her with Kathy in Out of the Past. I guess I'm curious in you navigating kind of the mysteries of Hollywood. I guess we talk now about typecasting, and it's so common. How often the actresses you highlight, was typecasting an issue after getting a good noir role that was just
God, yes. I mean, that's in another way, that's what the book is entirely about. It's like, how do you hold on to yourself and your sense of self when they're telling you this is who you are, this is how you're going to make your living? I mean, all of those women were typecast, except maybe Evelyn escaped it a little bit, because I'll tell you a funny story, and bookmark that if I get away from your question. But when we did that book signing at the Egyptian, one of my distinct memories was, first off, never invite 5 women to an event, to a public event together, especially actresses, right? Because there's a competitiveness there that is just it's going to come out. It's going to come out no matter what. And so I just remember in the green room beforehand, because I knew all of them extremely well. Some of them knew each other, right? Like Audrey Totter and Jane Greer were friends. And Audrey was pretty much friends with everybody. She could get along with everybody. But I remember there was some spiteful stuff going on in the green room, and I had to like lay down the law. And that was like a real moment in my life where I had to tell these women, look, I spent 2 years working on this book, and you're not going to it up right now. I mean, this is the coming out party. And so I did say, I used a line that I have never said to my wife, that I would never dare say to my wife, but it was basically along the lines of, shut the up. And they got the message. But then when we were out on stage, somebody made the mistake, it was probably me, of saying, trying to characterize them. And I said, they all made B pictures. And Evelyn just looked at me and she said, I have never made a B picture in my life. And that kind of set the tone. So it was a fun event. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. I have to ask, you and I talked briefly off air about this. I love Veronica Lake. She's not in your book, and I don't take it personal. I'm curious how, when you wrote this initially, how did you want to, I guess, who do you choose to focus on versus, were there other actresses that you wanted to include that maybe if there's a future edition we might see?
Doubtful, because it was, to me, I'm not going to do another edition unless it was something about actresses much later, because the ones that, I wanted to do Rhonda Fleming. It was interesting. Putting the book together was like casting a movie. It was exactly like casting a movie. I had ideas about who these women were and what they sort of represented, not just on screen, but in what I knew of their personal lives, right? So it was very interesting to me that two of the actresses that I really, really wanted to have in the book that I could not get were the two actresses who ended up living the most affluent lives. And that was Claire Trevor and Rhonda Fleming. They both married extremely well.
Yep.
Right. Claire Trevor's husband, Milton Bren, basically built Orange County. And Rhonda's husband, Ted Mann, owned the Mann theater chains and all that stuff. And he was a, multimillionaire. And it was interesting to me that they are the ones that declined to participate in the book. Whereas somebody like Ann Savage, who was, she was working in a legal office, and had a, 1-bedroom apartment off the Sunset Strip. And she was in her, like 80 years old, which is a lifestyle that I am sure a lot of women today can totally identify with. Like, is this going to be me when I'm 80 years old? Working a job, still working a job and living in an apartment somewhere. That was Anne's life, and so it was interesting to me. And even somebody like Marie, who was quote unquote well off, she lived a very, very modest, so did Audrey. They lived a very modest life, right? Audrey just lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Westwood. She didn't need much more, but anyway, it was interesting to me. Yeah, it was Elizabeth Scott, Claire Trevor, and Rhonda Fleming were the three actresses that I wanted to include in the original book because they were all alive. So I could actually do extended interviews with them. I quickly realized that Liz Scott pretty much was Norma Desmond. And so that really wasn't going to work out. I was not ready to be Joe Gillis to her Norma.
I didn't want to end up in the pool. You're right.
I did not want to end up face down in the pool. Let's just say that Liz had stuff that she was intent on keeping private, and she's not letting somebody in whose goal is to make sure all that private stuff becomes public. Right. And that was kind of the same way with Rhonda Fleming. She, I think I said in the book, we had this very bizarre phone call where she asked me, how many times have I been married? And I said 4. And she said, wrong answer. I've been married once to Ted Mann. And I said, but Rhonda, it's public knowledge, right? I can't deny
His office is
what's readily available information. And little did I realize when I said that I was wrong. She had actually been married 6 times. So But the thing that's interesting is after the book came out, Rhonda and I became very good friends. And she appeared many times with me. She at the TCM festival, at my Noir City festival. She donated money to the Film Noir Foundation to restore films. She just did not want to be in a public record having her life put out, because she became a very, very a major philanthropist in Southern California. I mean, she did wonderful things with the money that she got from her marriage to Ted Mann. She used it really, really well. And she just felt she was in a position where that kind of philanthropy, she didn't need anything revealed about her previous life that anybody could potentially use the wrong way or besmirch her in some way. So she just had to play it safe. Claire Trevor was fine. I mean, I did talk to her several times, but she was by far the oldest of all the women, and she had terrible emphysema. And just like what did in David Lynch recently, it eventually got Claire Trevor, because it was a lifetime of cigarette smoking and stuff. And she, I talked to her on the phone, and I just knew when it was time to bring it in for a landing, because I could just hear her voice going. And she said, "Honey, I'd love to keep talking, but I can barely breathe."
It makes me wonder how often old Hollywood stars to see today, like IMDb, like how they would feel about IMDb or Wiki, where like everything, your age, your personal life, all of that is now like out on the street in all of these different ways.
Or worse yet, social media. Imagine any of these people taking photo of their breakfast and sharing it with the world. Why on earth would you want to do that?
That's the thing. That's the only reason to do another book like this, is if it was dealing with that aspect of the culture. Just like, so now this is something else people have to deal with. I mean, it's pretty horrible. I mean, I know people who are performers today, and like they just say, I can't even go on social media because it's a rabbit hole that only leads to bad and dreadful things.
And there's even a fairly recent interview with Ethan Hawke, who was completely kind of shocked by his daughter's revelation that you're not even going to get an audition unless you have 100,000 followers on Instagram or something along those lines. And he's like, "What on earth are you talking about?" So to have that sort of that rapid churn between generations of Hollywood now, where it's like his own daughter is giving him information about the realities. And he's like, "I did this in the 90s. This was not even a consideration of mine back then. I was just a good looking kid who knew how to act."
Well, Emily, this is, you're again, right on the money with this, because it's, and it's not just movies. I mean, this is the effect that social media has had on the culture is, in my mind, so detrimental, because somehow they've replaced just the simplicity, the absolute ridiculousness of clicking a like as a replacement for knowledge and experience. I remember years ago, about the time I was doing this book originally, I went to, because I was no one, right? I didn't have a television show, and I had no national profile or anything like that. I was just a guy writing books. And I said, how am I going to get some traction here? And I met a woman in Los Angeles who was a publicist, specifically for a literary publicist. And I went to visit her. I really liked her a lot. And I went to visit her, and she took a phone call, and I went in her book room, and I was looking at all the people that she represented. And I realized in like 5 minutes, like, there's no way this is going to happen, because all the people that she represented were already independently wealthy people who were like famed plastic surgeon writing his first novel, and all this, and it was just like, so I just came out of the closet. So to speak. I came out of her closet, and I said, "So how much do you cost exactly?" And, she's, oh, we could work something out and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, no, there's no way this is going to work.
No.
And so that was then where at least those people did something for a living, as opposed to I'm just on TikTok or I'm an influencer and I've never proven that I know anything about anything.
I know.
But I have so many clicks that somehow people say, well, we have to go with this guy. Look, you know this. I come from a sports background. My dad was a sports writer, and it hurts. It hurts to see people like Jake Paul suddenly saying, I run this sport of boxing now. Like, what? He fights a guy 25 years older than him
and barely wins.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, as a journalist, and an old Hollywood fan, it's always great to see somebody, start tweeting about something that is old Hollywood related or something that they read in media where they're just like, it's low hanging fruit stuff they collect on Wikipedia and they regurgitate, and people are like, I didn't know this. This is amazing. I'm like, if you supported independent journalism or read books or something, you would know these things probably more in depth than your 3-minute Instagram video that you just watched. But let's be real, Shelley Winters would have rocked on social media. She would have been great. That's my 2 cents. But
then again, how much time would she have spent doing that? Yeah, she would have been great because she was not afraid to say what was on her mind. Yes. But is that always the best thing? Like I've always said, Raymond Chandler would have written a lot more books if he didn't engage in all this nasty letter writing that he did in his life, which is wonderful to have all this stuff and read it. But you're reading it and just thinking, why weren't you writing another book when you were spending all this time bitching and moaning about everything to your editor? Right, just write another book, for God's sake.
Or I mean, I just bought this book at the local thrift bookstore that I love here in LA. But it was about, and I think you've referenced it before. It's the book about all of the noir writers and like what they did afterwards, after everything has gone on, and just reading about some of the noir writers that just went on to not write books, but were like carousing and gambling and drinking and doing all sorts of other things, where you're just like, I get you had a really colorful life. That's great. You indulged in all the hedonism, but like, would have been great if there was more book writing done, because that's what I really want.
Well, yeah, I agree. And, and so let's twist this back towards the theme of Dark City Dames. But when you talk about noir writers, it's very interesting that in the past 10 or 15 years, I think there's become more of an appreciation for women writers in the genre than there ever was before, and I've kind of, jumping off from what I learned doing this book, I won't brook any kind of discussion of the great noir writers that does not include Patricia Highsmith and Dorothy Hughes, because they're as good as anybody else in that conversation. Honestly, Patricia Highsmith is way better than David Goodis, who everybody always talks about. I'm not interested in rating these things. It's just like, if you're having that conversation, you better include Patricia Highsmith, because she's as dark and noir as anybody.
The first time you read The Talented Mr. Ripley, especially after seeing the movies, you get a sense of just how incredible deft she is, and the tension you feel in the last 10 pages when you only have a handful of pages left and you're going, surely he's going to get caught. When is he going to get caught? And you flip the last page and and spoiler alert, it doesn't happen. You get so mad
Wait a second.
at her.
Emily, did you say you flipped to the last page?
No.
You're not like looking ahead, I hope.
You flip the last page and you finish the book, and you get so mad at her, and the visceral, like impressive anger you have towards Patricia Highsmith in the last 10 pages of Talented Mr. Ripley is one of the most incredible feelings you will ever get from a book.
Yeah, I'm doing. Oh, go on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I'm working on the Have You Read the Book Volume 2 right now, and I get to include Laura, so Vera Kaspari, and I mean that's another woman who wrote several books, and Laura is a great jumping off point for discovering this whole wealth of literature from an amazing, woman noir writer that, I don't necessarily know if people. I'm always fascinated by how people discover things in this day and age, with the algorithm. And, for me, it's watching Eddie and Ben and Alicia and the whole TCM team, talking about how they start with these novels as a jumping off point, and you open up this whole thing of like, well, I love this movie. I didn't even know that Vera Kaspari had all these books. So now I'm kind of trying to find time to read more of those while I'm actually reading the books for the book that I have to write. So
have you ever seen the movie I Can Get It For You Wholesale?
No, not yet.
With Susan Hayward?
No.
Yeah, it should be more well known, but she wrote the screenplay with Abraham Polanski. The two of them collaborated
on
that screenplay, and there's stuff in that movie that is so far ahead of its time.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, Susan Hayward has a few monologues that are like feminist manifestos in that movie. And it is really a good film, and just kind of slipped through the cracks. Fox, 1951.
Wow. Awesome. I do want to go back.
Great.
I want to go back to what we talked about up top. I mean, I know that people love to say film is not political, but film is political. It's always a political medium. And for me, reading the story of all these amazing women in this book and the movies, especially the movies, I know there's been a lot of scholars that have written about women in noir as being either reflections of this fear that women who don't have children are going to become venal and all of that, or that these are examples of, there's actually, I wonder if I can find the article that on JSTOR that I read that, pretty much said like, this is the male fear of what a woman who does not have children will turn into. But I mean, I'm curious in terms of how should we be looking at noir, and especially women in noir, in 2025?
Well, that's a tough question to ask because I don't personally believe that there's any way anybody should look at a movie, right? I mean, I kind of make a point of saying you can see in this what you want to see in it. And part of my career in noir has been based on overturning established notions of what this stuff meant at the time, right? Because I feel a lot of those interpretations are just very convenient, and they're not very rigorous intellectually. They're not really. It's just like, well, this is when they happened. This is when most of them were made, and so what was going on in the world at the time? Well, the war was over. So ergo, somebody at some point said it had to do with, men's fear of being emasculated by powerful women because they had served on the home front, working in shipyards and stuff during the war. I think that's like the stupidest interpretation of these things possible. I mean, it really is dumb because, number one, it's starting from a position of antagonism between the sexes that I don't think you're seeing how, number one, so many noir films, the established canon, if you will, of noir films are so male-centric because they were male film critics talking about this stuff. I mean, and writing their thesis and everything. And it was all, kill me, I'm about to use this term, but, male fragility, about this stuff. but it's just like, no, it was just, haven't you watched Joan Crawford? Haven't you watched Barbara Stanwyck? Haven't you watched Ida Lupino movies? That's they're noir too. Barbara Stanwyck is, besides being the greatest actress in the history of motion pictures, she made all these movies where she was the protagonist, right? And they're noir. They're totally noir. Strange Love of Martha Ivers. My God, look at that movie. Double Indemnity. Sorry, Wrong Number, which is a really underrated.
Leave her
Great
to heaven. I mean,
Leave her to heaven. But I mean, if you want to talk about the male fragility thing, watch Sorry, Wrong Number and see that performance Burt Lancaster gives. That's what that entire movie is about. It's the fact that he cannot deal with the fact that his wife is so much stronger than him that she has to pretend to be sick.
Burt Lancaster was the original Ken before Ryan Gosling did it. He was the OG.
Yeah. Anyway, where were we? Politics. Yes, it is very. There's a political aspect to all of this stuff, and a gender aspect to it, and a cultural. All of that stuff is mixed up in it, and I don't believe. I know a lot of people like somehow even suggesting that spoils the movies for them because they just want to believe it's just nothing but mindless entertainment. Like there are writers, producers, performers, directors. Everybody brings their own angle to all these films, and I'm just so fascinated by how whose vision kind of dominated this, but there's more to it than you realize. And I just think that the contribution of women has been really undervalued in this genre for far too long. Hence the retitling of the book, which is the major change from the original edition, where it went from being the wicked women of film noir to the women who defined film noir. Now, part of me understands that in the modern publishing landscape, you want to make that change so it's not just, because it's on the cover, right? What's inside the book really didn't change at all. I mean, the cover of the book changed because they don't want to alienate people who might want to read the book and say, oh, this guy is going to demonize women and say that, it's going to be a misogynistic take on the genre because he's calling them the wicked women of film noir, I find it interesting that Judith Regan had no problem with that subhead on the original edition. Maybe that tells us something about Judith more than the culture at large. But I had no problem making that change because it kind of goes hand in hand with my own attitude about, we now know about Joan Harrison, that she was one of the major producers of film noir. We now know so much more about Ida Lupino. We now have so much more of an appreciation for Joan Crawford as an auteur, that she was really the driving force behind the movies that she made. So yeah, I don't, I take it with a grain of salt. I'm not trying to say that, women made this genre. Women they didn't. But they deserve more respect for the contributions that they did make, and film is also, it's interesting to have these discussions because film is the most collaborative art form.
Truly, yeah.
And so to focus just on, as you may notice when I do my my intros on TCM, it's almost an unwritten law in my book that I don't say a film by and cite the director. I will never say, I will never put a possessive on the film, like Joseph H. Lewis's Gun Crazy, right? I know enough about how this stuff gets done that it's like, no, he does not own that film. Right. Peggy Cummins owns that film as much as Joseph H. Lewis owns that film. right? And based on a screenplay by McKinley Cantor and Dalton Trumbo. And, Russell Harlan's cinematography goes a long way toward making that the classic that it is. So, I just don't believe in doing that. And it's interesting, Ben and I had a conversation a while back about how we want to take out the word legendary from introductions.
Ooh.
Like, you don't get to call every other person legendary, right? There are certain legendary figures in Hollywood history, but
you mean everything can't be iconic? Like,
oh my God. Like there's a reason these words exist, right? Legendary is a very specific thing. It's like this person is so famous. There's such a legend about them that you'll hear a lot of lies about them as much as you'll hear truth because they're legends. The legend is because they were a legendary, Orson Welles is a legendary filmmaker, right? I would draw the line well short on most other film directors, right? Anyway.
I love that. I want to talk about Noir City Hollywood, which is coming at the end of March. You have, we're celebrating women in this book, women not in this book. It's opening with Roadhouse, the Ida Lupino film, which is fantastic. I think I saw it
Nitrate, no less.
In Nitrate, exactly. I saw it at the TCM Film Festival a couple years ago when they played it, and that was so much fun. The Grifters is going to be there, a contemporary noir with Annette Bening, doing a Q&A. A lot of really good stuff.
Well, it's interesting, Kristen, because I said, I want to do a festival the whole year of the circuit of Noir City festivals. All are tied into the book. So we're looking at movies with female protagonists or antagonists. And Grant Moninger at the American Cinematheque had the great idea of why don't we do like a subset of the festival that's neo-noir films, because maybe we can get some of these actresses to come out and appear with the movie. And this was kind of inspired by I did a radio show recently where I was on with Jennifer Tilly. And I said, man, I'd love to show Bound and have you come out and do this, and I shouldn't be saying this, but we're still hoping that we'll get a reunion because we're trying to get Gina Gershon to do this as well. With Jennifer committed, but Gina has not committed. So she's busy. This is the problem when you do, working actors and actors. We don't say actresses anymore, right? Working actors.
I still say actresses. I don't know.
Still find myself typing it all the time. And then it's like, but see, I'm such a writer. It's like, oh, you mean I can save those few letters by not having to spell out actress? Then
exactly.
I will.
Exactly. Yeah. I will say I'm going to manifest the reunion because I have not seen Bound. So I was thinking I'll go and see it for the first time at Noir City because Jennifer Tilly's going to be there. But if you get both, oh my gosh, my head might explode because that is a pairing right there. So
yeah, very much. And Jennifer is just a hoot. She is she is fabulous.
I love her.
I'm looking forward to that. And I was, of course, hoping we're showing the Grifters, and I was hoping for a Grifters reunion. Like, let's get everybody. But we've got Annette, and trust me, Annette is enough on her own. Annette is fabulous. So I'm very excited about that. And we're also showing Destroyer, which is like the unknown Nicole Kidman movie, which I think is absolutely fabulous. Directed by a woman, Karen Kusama, and I think the movie is great. And Karen will be there with her husband Phil, who wrote the movie. And I'm just hoping that Nicole Kidman was off shooting a movie or something, so she couldn't do it. But
and our fellow Ticklish business friend Mariah Gates is gonna be there as well, doing promoting her book. So yeah, it's gonna be. I will be at the Grifters. It's one of my favorite Stephen Frears movies. If Angelica Houston walks through the Egyptian lobby, I would again lose my mind. I would be terrified of her. but God damn it if I wouldn't respect her at the same time. It
No,
would
she's very sweet. I ran into her on the street in Santa Monica one day, and we had a really nice conversation. She's
That's
very nice
amazing.
and very approachable.
My inner 8-year-old though is still like I saw the witches at a formative age. So, it's hard to not be like, I know you lead them all and I respect it, but also I'm very afraid.
Yeah.
But and I mean you're also gonna be at the TCM Film Festival at the end of April. I don't know what you can say about that, but how excited should we be for that?
I can't say much because I haven't got my marching orders at this point. I mean, I put in some ideas for things that I wanted to do, but I don't know if that's going to happen or not. So there's a couple of things I know about that I am very excited about that aren't particularly noir related. But it's always fun.
It'll be interesting. They're showing Enchanted Cottage, which I just included in my disability and film book this year. I had never seen it, and somebody recommended it to me, and I watched it, and it's got its flaws, but it made for some interesting writing. So I'm excited to see people go see it and then tell them about where I couched it in the context of representation and all of that.
Mhm.
'Cause it's
Now, do you have anything in your book about Sign of the Ram?
I do. Susan Peters, yes, is my
Yeah,
girl.
that's quite a story.
So good. I actually read the original. I got a copy of the original book, Sign of the
Yeah.
Ram, from one of I ordered out for it. I forget which thrift store it came from, like East Coast. They sent me a copy. And
Did you get the paperback edition that has her on the front?
yep, I do.
Yeah.
And it holds a special place in my bookshelf. And I was reading it and it was an interesting read because the way that the author writes certain things, it's actually a bit more progressive about disability and like the ways that people infantilize, but they have good intentions, and the fact that the character doesn't want to be a burden, but she also is dealing with the societal pressure of like, you should be grateful. It's very remarkably nuanced for the
Wow.
1940s that I wish the movie had been able to have a bit
Right.
more of that. But, I still love the movie. I think Susan Peters is great. I love that she has this big, bulky, like wheelchair that looks like the ugliest chintz chair ever that you could be sitting in with like
Yeah.
ruffles and stuff, and they have to like push it with
Well,
their
because they
whole
wanted
back.
it, they clearly wanted it to be her like mobile throne.
Yeah, yeah, and I was just like,
Emily, do you know this movie?
I only through Kristen's writing because I'm lucky that I've gotten to read the book. So and then I went to go and watch clips of it and look at stills of it, and it's a very
It's a really interesting
interesting
film.
Yeah.
Susan Peters is a really interesting woman. I did a Instagram video about how I was really upset. I told this to Diane Baker of all people about how I was really upset that Susan Peters was the first disabled person to do a TV show in the 50s. And unfortunately, there are no copies. I think somebody said
Hmm.
there's one episode, I think in the Library of Congress or something, like one little bit of it left, but the TV show is gone for everybody, and it makes
Hmm.
me very sad that
Yeah.
such a huge piece of disabled history is unfortunately lost to the wind.
Her whole story is so noir.
It's
It's
so
so
noir. Yes. I mean, I
incredibly.
I love her. And it makes me very happy that I was able to kind of like go along. I'm like, Harold Russell's great. I got to talk about him, got to dive into his life and all of that. But I was like, Susan Peters, she's the one that I think is really interesting. So spoiler alert to people when the
Well,
book comes
good.
out.
I will steer people to your book in that regard because I considered including her in Dark City Dames. I mean, she has no noir cred other than that movie,
Yeah.
but the story is so intense. And then I actually dropped it out because it was too intense.
I was gonna. I mean, I don't know if you know, but one of the big mysteries. I know that I love how we veered into Susan Peters territory. One of the big Susan Peters mysteries that I've always been interested in. For people that don't know, Susan Peters was paralyzed in a hunting accident. Somebody's gun went off and she got paralyzed. Have you ever found out? I scoured for hours trying to find out whose gun it was. Was it her husband's? They had
Oh,
friends.
I don't have any doubt that it was Richard Quine. It was his gun that went off.
Ugh.
I'm not saying he shot her, but it was his gun, which is why he never overcame the guilt of that accident. And, that's why the story ends up being so incredibly dark and tragic, is
Yeah.
because he would eventually kill himself with a hunting rifle. And, which I don't know, it was the exact rifle that shot her, but symbolically, I mean,
Right.
it's pretty clear that he never really overcame the guilt about that whole situation.
Yeah. Hollywood, there is a whole story here that you could do some really interesting disability representation and probably cast Scarlett Johansson or something to play Susan Peters. But,
Don't say that. No.
But it's so sad because she tried so valiantly to come back.
Yeah, she did. And what always irks me, and I had to kind of I had to put a little snark in the book when I wrote about her. I was like, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz said that she should make TV, that they were the ones that steered her into television. And I was like, yeah, it's a great idea, Lucy and Desi. You had a TV show that you could have maybe put her in, but you didn't. So, I mean, I had to give them a little guff that, like, throw the woman a bone or something. Like, it's just it's she's such a fascinating character. I feel like I've become a little protective of her because I'm like, so many able writers have written about her, and I'm like, there's so much tragedy in her life. Yes, I'm like, but we have to also couch it in the terms of societal context. I'm like, it was tragic because Hollywood would not allow her to succeed. That I think ultimately is what I kind of kept harping on. I'm like, had we been more accepting of people with disabilities and giving them roles and letting them do these things, like the same thing happened with Harold Russell. Harold Russell wanted desperately to keep working. And allegedly, William Wyler said there's not going to be any roles for people with no hands. So, take a trade. So I will be I'm hopeful that people will read it and want to do some more research and see some of these movies and kind of ask the question of, like, why? Why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we, like, changing this paradigm? I'm trying. But Eddie, oh my gosh, it's always great to talk to you. It's always great to get to chat about anything, let alone your fantastic book, which I have the copy right here.
There it is. I
Yeah.
see that. Yes.
Yeah. So it comes out April 8th, if memory serves.
That is correct.
And the Noir City starts at mid March. I think you have
Correct.
2
Starts
weeks.
March 20th.
Yeah.
March 20th to the 30th, but people just have to remember that there are no shows Monday through Wednesday.
Right. And
So
then, of
20th
course,
to the 30th, no shows. Yeah.
and of course, the TCM Classic Film Festival is the end of April. So you will be all over the board over the next. I'm assuming there will be more trips as well. Where can fans find out about where you're going to be, learn about the book, keep in touch,
I
all of
guess,
that?
well, Running Press is the publisher of the book, and they like me to steer people to their website. So go to runningpress.com, I guess. If people want to buy the book, I know I'm supposed to send them to Running Press, but I always support Larry Edmunds' bookstore in Hollywood. And you will get signed copies if you buy it through Larry Edmunds, because I always go in there and sign as many as my wrist will allow. And then and go to the filmnoirfoundation.org or noircity.com to find out about the festivals and all that stuff, because we do 9 of those now. We do 9 Noir City festivals around the country. So we'll be in Hollywood, obviously, but then we'll also be in Boston and Portland and Chicago and Detroit and Washington, D.C., the noir capital of the world now. And then I say Noir City, Philadelphia, but it's actually Phoenixville, outside of Philadelphia, at a beautiful venue there called the Colonial Theater, which is where they shot The Blob. If you've seen The Blob and you know that there's a theater where the blob comes project. That's the Colonial Theater, and they do Blobfest there every year.
Okay, that's on my bucket list. Go to Blobfest.
It's really nice. Phoenixville is, and I just want to tell this tale because it's important. That theater, the resurrection of that theater, which was really falling apart and in disrepair, and local people brought it back, and it has become the centerpiece of the revitalization of the entire town. So Phoenixville now has a beautiful, the street that it's on, it has a beautiful promenade with all kinds of businesses and restaurants and bars, and the theater is the anchor. And it feels like the way it used to feel in this country, going to a local theater where it's like, this is great. I can go out and make a whole night of it and hang out with my friends. It's fantastic. And the same is true because when we do these Noir City festivals, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for venues like that. So we do the Redford Theater in Detroit, which is the same thing. It's an all volunteer thing to keep the venue alive. And the Music Box in Chicago, which is now considered one of the great vintage theaters in America. The Grand Lake Theater here in my neck of the woods, which is still maintained as a beautiful, classic, majestic movie palace. So, I mean, when I started doing all this stuff, it was like, hey, let's save the movies. Then it was like, hey, let's save the theaters while we're at it. And now, of course, as you both are well aware, it's saving the audience. We got to save the audience for these movies, right? And I have a ground's eye view of this. So I know for a fact when I go out and do these shows that I'm seeing young people coming out and they're in the audience and they're teenagers. And, we attract an audience that goes from teenagers up to people who are attending so that they can come up to me and say, I saw this movie when it came out. Right. And they don't always have a walker, but sometimes they do, so noir appeals to everybody.
That it does. That's going to close out Ticklish Business for this episode. As always, we thank everybody who has continued to support us while we've been on our hiatus. The episodes are happening, as you can see. We're looking at a monthly schedule for right now until we are done finishing our numerous book projects that we continue to add to our plate. Right, Emily?
Yeah, they continue to go as we continue to need paychecks in order to live our lives and also bring you this wonderful show.
Exactly. So if you'd like to become a patron and help keep the lights on at Ticklish Biz HQ, you can head over to patreon.com/ticklishbiz. You can always listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Spotify and Apple Podcasts are the two main routes. And our archive going all the way back to episode 1 is at ticklishbusiness.podbean.com. And of course, we have our own personal social media and places where you can find us. You can always find me at Kristen Lopez 88, wherever you are on social media these days. And I have my Substack where I talk all about movies and entertainment and how horrible everything is. That's called The Film Maven, which is at The Film Maven, that's 2ms.substack.com. Emily Edwards, where are you on the interwebs?
I am virtually everywhere at Ms. Emily Edwards and MsEmilyEdwards.com. If I have anything new, I'll be linking to it there. So take that for what you will.
We don't know when we will be back. I know that we have some fun things in the works that I don't want to announce right now, but you can bet that we will be back for sure post TCM Classic Film Festival to give you all of that great Film Fest audio to make it seem like you were there, even if you weren't. Till